Hello, everyone. This is Warren Wilson speaking. Folks are just getting logged on, and we'll just give this another moment and we will begin. So welcome. We'll just take a moment here as folks come in. Okay, it is the top of the hour. Hello, welcome everyone. This is Warren Wilson speaking. I'm going to be moderating today's call. I hope you're well wherever you are. Just a couple of logistical notes to begin with today. First of all, there is simultaneous interpretation available to support today's webinar. At the bottom of your screen, there is an interpretation icon, a little globe. If you click on that, you'll have a choice to hear either the French or English feed. The presentation will be made today in English, and the slides that you're seeing here on the screen are obviously in English. There is also a link to the same slides en français that is being placed in the chat function right now. So if you'd like to follow the slide deck along en français, click on that link and you'll get the deck. Now, today's meeting is being held in the Zoom webinar platform. I know we're all getting very accustomed to a variety of platforms. You may not be familiar with Zoom webinar. It's a little different than the regular Zoom. You'll see a few differences. We're using it because we have a large group today. The Zoom webinar will mean that you're muted to begin with. You're also not going to see your video. However, you will be able to make use of the raise hand function, and there's a Q&A function down there as well. I'll talk about those some more a little later on, but that very similar functionality is available to you. I will speak about the approach for today's event in a few moments in a bit more detail, but we want to get going here now. And I will start by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you today from the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin people. I acknowledge that there are participants today from across the country participating from many other traditional territories. With that, I would like to introduce one of the co-chairs of something called a steering committee. There has been a steering committee you'll be hearing more about that has been leading the development of the strategic plan that we're here to present and discuss today. Mr. Scott Ross is the Assistant Executive Director of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture. I'm going to turn things over to Scott to get us going proper here today. Scott, to you, please.
Thank you, Warren. Yeah, and I'll introduce my co-chair, Kathleen Sullivan from Food and Beverage Canada. You'll hear more from her shortly here, but just wanted to note, my excitement and pleasure at seeing so many people engaging on this announcement of our strategic plan to address labor and skill shortages in agriculture, food and beverage manufacturing. And I'm also very pleased to welcome Francis Drouin, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Agriculture and Agri-Food, who will provide some opening remarks. I know Mr. Drouin quite well, as I'm sure many of you do, as a strong advocate for the agriculture and food processing industries in Canada throughout his years in Parliament. And as a rural MP from the Ottawa area and long-serving member of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food, he's well aware of the labor challenges our industry has faced over the years. And so I'm pleased to introduce you to Mr. Drouin, and thank you for being with us today for today's important announcement. So I'll pass it to you now for some opening remarks.
Thank you, Scott, and I certainly look forward to the announcement. I know how labor is important to the sector, and I know because I get the calls as well from whether they're farmers or processors. I have both worlds at my place, and I know labor is a major issue, and it's an impediment to potential growth. So bonjour à tous. On behalf of Minister Bibeau, I want to applaud the Canadian Agricultural Human Resource Council and your partners at the Canadian Federation of Agriculture and Food and Beverage Canada for your efforts towards a national workforce strategic plan for the sector. This will be a challenging mission, but as everyone here knows, the need to secure a high sustainable workforce for Canada's agriculture and agri-food sector couldn't be greater. The widening labor gap is felt at every link in the food chain, the farm, the food processor, the trucks, and wholesale and retail. Tens of thousands of jobs are unfulfilled, resulting in economic loss and missed opportunities. With Canada's unemployment rates returning to record lows, but job vacancies remaining high, most sectors in Canada are short of workers. But the agriculture and agri-food sector has long faced particular challenges. Jobs are often seasonal and located in rural areas. Work is physical with unique skills requirements, and the current workforce is older than average. The pandemic underscored the importance of the sector's workforce and its commitment to keep producing food during times of crisis. But the pandemic also amplified labor challenges as competition for workers intensified across the entire economy. And the bottom line is your workforce strategic initiative couldn't be more timely. We need real and lasting change, and we need it urgently. As you know, Minister Bibeau is very focused on the labor issue. It's a key priority in her mandate from the Prime Minister. And I can tell you she is serious about this, and she's talking to me, if not every day, almost every day, about the labor challenges and twisting Minister Qualtrou's arm on certain issues that we could be fixed. She has already begun working with cabinet colleagues, as I've just mentioned, along with provincial and territorial governments, industry, and others to develop an agricultural labor strategy. With the development of this strategy, we will be better positioned to address short-term pressures and advance long-term solutions to help farmers and food processors get the work they need. It's crucial that the federal strategy and your national workforce strategy be complementary, not duplicative, or even worse, working at cross purposes. As the minister moves forward on developing a federal labor strategy, I encourage you to work with us to inform and enrich our shared efforts to address labor and skill shortages. We can bounce ideas off of each other and move forward together towards our common goal, a sufficient, reliable, and skilled workforce that will drive the growth of the sector. The labor gap is serious and it's growing. There's plenty of room for new solutions. In the immediate term, the federal government is taking steps to help fill the labor gap on the farm and in the processing plants. Just last Monday, we launched the Workforce Solutions Roadmap, which makes key improvement to the temporary foreign worker program, including increase the current low wage gap for food and beverage processing employers, and extending the validity of labor market impact assessments to give international worker more time to secure work permits. These measures will bring immediate relief, but we also need to stay focused on lasting solutions to this challenge. As well, we need to reflect the diversity of the industry. Some of the different sectors and regions will need solutions tailored to their unique needs. The sector's labor challenge are complex and touch upon various levels of governments and stakeholders. No single group, public or private, can resolve the issues alone. We need everyone at the table, everyone pulling in the same direction. And today, we're off to a very good start indeed. The Canadian Agricultural Human Resource Council has more than a decade of experience in forming partnerships to examine issues and build meaningful solutions. Partners like the CFA and Food and Beverage Canada have the pulse of agri-food employers across the nation. And there are many more others online today from across the sector whose perspective and expertise will be essential to making real progress. So on behalf of Minister Bibeau, I thank all partners here today for your passion and dedication. We certainly look forward to working with you to build a skilled, resilient, and sustainable workforce to help the sector capture the exciting opportunities that lie ahead. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Over to you, Scott.
Actually, I'm going to pick it up here. So I want to let everyone know that Parliamentary Secretary Joanne has other commitments and won't be able to stay with us for the full 2 hours. But I so want to thank you for taking the time to join us today as we launch this incredibly important project. As you have pointed out so eloquently, labor is a critical issue, certainly for food and beverage manufacturing and for primary agriculture and across the entire food supply chain. We were very pleased with the incredible announcements this week and with yesterday's federal budget that had further announcements on labor. And I really want to point out that we've worked really closely with Minister Bibeau over the last few months leading up to those announcements, and we very much recognize the support that she has provided and the leadership that she has provided on this. So a very big thank you for joining us today for this really important launch. And through you, thank you as well to the Minister for her support of this project and for all that she's really done for us over the last while in supporting us on our labor issues. So with that, I don't know, Francis, if you're able to stay for a little while. If you are, you're certainly welcome. But if not, again, thank you for showing your support for the project and for being with us here this afternoon. What I want to do now is sort of move into the rest of our program. And like Scott, I want to take the time to welcome everyone here. Of course, I'm Kathleen Sullivan. I'm CEO of Food and Beverage Canada, and I'm the co-chair along with Scott of this really important project. Thank you all for joining us. We have here today about 200 participants from the agriculture and from the food and beverage manufacturing sectors, but also from governments and from academia and from other groups that are play critical roles in different aspects of labor issues. I know that Scott shares my view when I say that we are very honored to be co-chairing this important and ambitious project. Today, for example, in my sector, food and beverage manufacturing, we are facing a chronic and structural labor shortage. We have companies reporting vacancy rates of 20 and 25% and even more. That's an outstanding figure. And this has had a really detrimental impact on food production across the country, on animal welfare, and I think most importantly to me, on the health and the well-being of our current workforce. Labor was already a challenge before COVID, but the pandemic has resulted in a significant shift in labor markets. And now, more than ever, it is really critical for us all to ensure that we have the right environment to attract and retain workers, and that we have workers with the right skills to support our sector in the future. As I noted this past week, we saw a series of federal announcements that will help our industries in the short term. But the project we're here to talk about today is designed to identify the measures we need to support our workforce in the future. We want to really recognize that so many of you are already very active working on labor issues. And the goal of this project is not to set that aside, quite the contrary. It's really to bring all of your important work together, to make sure that we can continue to support it, and to ensure that we are all working in the same direction towards a common set of goals. I'll turn to Scott for a few remarks of his own, and then we'll get on with the program.
Yeah, thank you, Kathleen. And I would just say, I think building on Kathleen's comments, labor challenges in agriculture and primary agriculture are not a new concern. I think we're all very much accustomed to what have become increasingly chronic labor shortages. But I think the concerns Kathleen referenced also really have grown in importance for Canadian farmers as well, in that we hear more than ever anxieties, concerns, and challenges associated with labor-related disruptions and constraints up and down the supply chain. And I think it really speaks to the importance of the approach we're here talking about today, and taking a very collaborative approach to this issue that spans our entire industry. And really for that reason, I'm just so pleased at the partners we have around the table in Food and Beverage Canada and CAHRC, who have just continued to demonstrate, as someone who's been working in primary agriculture for 10 years now, such a collaborative, industry engaged approach to labor issues in our sector. And I think it is something that will really serve us well as we embark upon this process. And that's going to focus not only on the immediate issues and some of those that Kathleen referenced, but those long-term challenges that continue to plague our sector and limit our ability to realize our full potential to the benefit of all of Canada. And so with that, I'll pass it back to Warren for a few more housekeeping remarks and look forward to all the discussion.
Thanks, Scott, and thanks, Kathleen. Much appreciated. So I just want to take a moment to review our agenda and approach for today. And I see some good conversation going on in the chat now. The purpose today is to share with you the work that's been done so far that has led to the development of this strategic plan, and to share with you the strategic plan itself, and talk about next steps, where we go from here. So toward that end, the agenda is split into 3 parts. We're going to have 3 presentations. The first that you see framed on the slide in front of you right now will focus on the project itself, what has led us to today. We will pause after that presentation, and I'll open it up to Q&A and discussion. We'll then move on to the elements of the strategic plan itself, vision, goals, and objectives. Again, we'll pause after we present the strategic plan and welcome your questions and comments. And then we'll finish things off today by talking about next steps, how you might get involved if you're not already going forward. And again, we'll have an opportunity for some questions and dialogue. Now, we've got 199 people on the line today, and a couple hours to work with. So what I'll say, when we get to the discussion portions of the agenda, we'll pause at the end of each of these presentations. I'll ask you to use that raise hand function, and I'll do my best to get you in the queue. Or I would suggest you use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen there to ask questions. And I will also direct those questions to the presenters as best we can. I see some of you in the chat now introducing yourselves. I think that's great functionality for that. To introduce, share information. Questions though for the presenters, let's try and use that Q&A function just so I can try and stay half organized here this afternoon. So I think that's about it for now. With that, I'd like to introduce Jennifer Wright. Many of you will know Jennifer. She's the Executive Director of CAHRC, and she's going to let you know how this project has come about and how it's progressed to where it is today. So Jennifer, over to you, please.
Thanks so much, Warren, and welcome everyone. Very pleased to see a great turnout and the interest in the work that we're doing here. I think that reflects well on the issues that the industry is facing and the seriousness and critical juncture we're at as far as labor shortages go within the industry. Just to provide a little bit of overview for you, the project, the National Workforce Strategic Plan for Agriculture and Food Manufacturing, is a 2-year project that we're looking at really identifying the great work that's happening across the country and has been happening for some time around these issues, as well as being able to identify those gaps and work together to move forward on actionable items. And so the objectives of this work is really to bring together industry associations and employers to develop that actionable roadmap. And we'll talk a little bit about that later in the presentation today, as well as really working on short, medium, and long-term solutions to address the labor shortages. So as has already been nicely outlined by Mr. Drouin, as well as Scott and Kathleen, there are a number of issues facing the industry, and I think we're all living those day to day. And Canada's agriculture and food and beverage manufacturing sector is really needing to work together to address some of these labor issues. Without doing so, I think we're already seeing some of the impacts of that with growth being slowed down, expansion plans being slowed or put on the shelf, decreased production, and things like that. We certainly we know that it is a very complex issue and that we do not have, there's not one answer to this issue whatsoever. Our own labor market information prior to the pandemic shows that, that shortage is real and will continue to grow. Currently, we do have temporary foreign workers that are able to fill the gap of about 59,000 positions, and it's extremely important that the temporary foreign workers are able to do that. It still leaves us with a gap of about 16,000 jobs. Again, this was prior to the pandemic. We do assume that this has grown as well, and certainly the challenge has not gone away. So we look forward to the conversation. We look forward to building on this actionable roadmap and working with all of you to be able to address the issues, bring solutions to the table, and work together as an industry to move forward. At this time, I would also like to take a few minutes to thank our funder for this work. The Future Skills Center is an organization that has provided funding for the work that we are embarking on or have embarked on over the last year and continue to do so. So I'd like to introduce Noel Baldwin, who is the Director of Government and Public Affairs with the Future Skills Center, to have an opportunity to share a few words, but also to provide our thanks publicly to Future Skills Center for supporting this important work. So over to you, Noel.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. Thank you to everybody for having us here today. Bonjour, je suis ravi de vous joindre et certainement le Centre des compétences futures sommes absolument ravis d'être un partenaire sur ce projet important. The Future Skills Center, some of you may know us, but for those who don't, we're an initiative funded by the Government of Canada's Future Skills Initiative. We are an action-oriented research center that's based at Ryerson University with a strong partnership as a consortium with Conference Board of Canada and Blueprint ADE. We focused in on issues around the future of Canada's economic sectors as one of our 4 strategic priorities. So when we had a chance to work with CAHRC on the development of a project that would help this sector do some forward thinking about how to meet short-term and long-term labor and skill needs, it was a really obvious piece for us to get involved in. So we're really proud and happy to see how much work has been accomplished so far and the roadmap that you've sketched out going into the future. As we talked with lots of stakeholders across the country and learned for some of us for the first time about some of the challenges facing the agriculture, agri-food sector, it was very interesting, the kind of confluence of factors that are shaping some of the challenges and how much they reflect what we hear in any number of sectors, from the introduction, adaptation, and integration of new technologies to seasonal workforce challenges and links with Canada's immigration systems as well. So a lot of complex issues, and that's really where Future Skills Center is trying to be both a catalyst and a partner in working with actors in skills development and with employers and workers across all of Canada's economic sectors and across Canada's wide geography. So as I say, this was a bit of a no-brainer for us, and we've had such a great partnership with CAHRC and with the different actors in the sector with whom we've had a chance to collaborate. So really excited to see this event today coming together, the plan coming together, and all of our best wishes for continued success as you go forward with your meeting today and with the implementation of the plan. We look forward to other opportunities to continue to work together to see the results and understand how this kind of process might benefit other sectors and other parts of Canada's economy and society. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you very much, Noel and Jen. And if we were together, you'd be getting a little round of applause right now, actually. So we're going to spend the bulk of our time today on the content of this strategic plan, this roadmap that has been developed, and that's going to come next. But we thought it was important to start with a little bit of context here from Jen and Noel and your co-chairs, or the co-chairs of the steering committee who's been leading the exercise. Are there any questions of clarification on this context that you'd like to ask? Any questions for Jen? Any questions for Noel, perhaps Kathleen or Scott? And to use that raise hand function, use that Q&A function to drop a question in there, and I'll get you into the queue here. Any questions? I'll just pause for a moment. There's one, I'm just following on. Could you please, this is from Shannon Tucker. Could you please remind me if provinces and territories were involved in engagement/development? So who's been involved so far? Jen?
So far there has been engagement across the board, national commodity associations. We've been reaching out to federal government as well as provincial and territorial governments and commodity groups and industry associations. As you'll see as we continue to present where we're at as an update and where we're looking to go, that engagement we hope will only increase and continue, because certainly our way of looking at this is that everybody, the more people involved, the better. This is really, you know, an opportunity for us all to work together and move in the same direction, and that definitely includes provinces, territories, and many stakeholders in the process.
Anything to add there, Scott or Kathleen?
I'll just echo what Jen just said about this really is sort of a group project, if you will. One thing that we have learned in food and beverage manufacturing is that this is an issue that touches everybody. So it touches every company, it touches every provincial association, every product association, but none of us have the resources as individual organizations or companies to really make the kind of meaningful change and structural change that we need to support a solid workforce. And really what this project to me is about is identifying and recognizing the work that everybody is doing. And everybody includes companies, producers, associations, producer groups, academic institutions, governments of different levels and orders, other training institutions, and really trying to understand how do we start moving everybody sort of forward in the same direction towards some common goals. And that really does require that we have as many of us on board and participating in this as possible, because it's the collective of all of the work that we're doing that can really make change. And for me, there's a number of people on the call today for the past 4 months on food and beverage manufacturing. We're a little bit behind on labor, I think, compared to some of primary agriculture, but we actually formed a task force of 11 associations that have been working together for a number of months. And we really found, we lived this, that it was only by bringing together our collective resources, skill sets, that we were actually able to start to move the bar on some measures that could actually support us. And that's the kind of spirit of this project, and is really trying to bring things together, trying to culturally learn collectively how do we work together and combine the things that we're doing. So I think the more people who are involved in this, absolutely the better.
Great, thanks for that, Kathleen. We've got a few other questions here in the Q&A. I'll go to the next one from Anonymous. And by the way, if you move your cursor over your name on that participant list, I think there's an option there so you can put your name in if sometimes an email address, or in this case, Anonymous, shows up. Anyway, the question is, how does this new effort relate to the existing agriculture Workforce Action Plan, developed earlier by the chairs of the 11 Ag Value Chain Roundtables in CAHRC. Jen, could you speak to that one, please?
Yeah, sure. And it's a great question. And, you know, it's really one of the reasons it took us almost a year to, you know, start working on this and come to where we are today. We really wanted to focus on the work that has been done, have that inform where we're going, because certainly, you know, the issues and needs identified in that action plan, you know, continue today and in many cases only grew worse. So we've really used the content that was developed there and the work that was done there as a foundation for this work and to carry forward instead of starting from scratch. And we also know that there's been a lot of great work done on the food and beverage manufacturing side of things, identifying issues and kind of going through the same process. So really what we wanted with this project was to build on those foundations of that great work that's been done and to map out a way to move forward with actionable items that have, you know, a plan in how we're going to move from point A to point B.
Great, thanks, Jen. And I'll go down this list now. I just noticed the participant list, Deanna. If you click on the participants icon at the bottom of your screen, the list of participants in today's call will show up on the right-hand side of your screen. So a question from Steve: were there any surprises that you encountered when doing your engagement with respect to challenges of the workforce? Have there been any surprises so far? Jen, Kathleen, Scott?
Well, I could start. I mean, certainly I think, and I don't know if it was a surprise to everyone, but I think in so many different respects, as we've kind of started working this strategy together and engaging so many different stakeholders, how much commonality there is across our different industries, I think has been a very striking sort of point for me in that, you know, we often in the primary agriculture side have been working on this issue. And I don't mean to say in a silo, because I think we have done a very effective job through CAHRC and other venues of being collaborative within our sector, but focused on our own issues. And I think the longer kind of I work with Kathleen on this and some of her partners, the more we realize how many areas of commonality there are, and just the sense that I think more than anything, there's a lot of people working in this space, and I think the surprises in many respects are still to come as we try to leverage and engage with everyone across this country that's working on this, because that really is, the engagement has just begun in this process, and I think there's a lot to learn still ahead of us.
Thanks. All right, I'll keep going here. And yes, so there will be a recording distributed. I saw that question in the chat. My mistake on the functionality that's available in Zoom webinar that we're in right now. So you have a chat, raise hand, Q&A, and interpretation function, I guess at the bottom, no participant list. All right, I'm going to go to that next question there from Glenn Lucas. We're still looking forward. We're all looking forward to a post-COVID-19 world and getting back to some semblance of normal, but many things have and will continue to change due to COVID. Looking forward to streamlining and simplifying the temporary foreign worker programs. Will the project increase flexibility in the TFW programs while also protecting workers? And we're going to get into the content of the strategy next. Scott or Kathleen, do you want to jump in on that one?
So I'll just start and then turn to Scott. I know this is an issue that's equally important to both of our sectors. Scott and I in the next segment will actually go through the key themes that this strategy is going to be looking at, and one of them is foreign workers. So we'll talk to you a little bit more about it there. I will say that we did see a series of announcements this week from the federal government. On Monday, Minister Qualtrough at ESDC made an announcement. Yesterday, there were some budget announcements that went to Monday's announcements were probably more geared to food processing, in that they played with our caps. We actually have fairly restrictive caps on the percentage of our workers that can be TFWs. But yesterday's budget announcement did actually include some additional funding to address processing times for TFWs, and also to put applications, LMIA applications, and also to put in place a trusted employer program that we would hope would, with it, also address the sort of administrative burden and the length and the heaviness, if you will, of LMIA applications. So there's still a lot of work to do. I think the really on TFW program on lots of areas of labor. I think on TFW in particular, what we have seen very recently is an acknowledgement on the part of the federal government that the program is important, that we have a serious labor challenge in agri-food, that the TFW program plays an important role in that, and that we do need to find ways to facilitate employers being able to access the program while at the same time ensuring that we've got the necessary protections and safeguards for workers themselves. So I think what we saw recently was a willingness on the part of the federal government to have some of these conversations about streamlining and also to put some money to back that up. But certainly a lot of work on our part as industry to help shape what those measures look like.
And I would just add, I mean, Glenn, I appreciate the question. As you know, this is an ever-present focus of ours as a sector. Is through our own temporary foreign worker program working group, we're always trying to find new ways to introduce more flexibility and streamline the program. But I think what this strategy offers is an opportunity to sort of elevate that work with additional stakeholders at the table and really look at how we can kind of reapproach some of these longstanding concerns and do things a little differently to make sure that we are, I think, capturing some of the opportunities that Kathleen referenced around the new mindset we are seeing more recently from the federal government around this program in particular. So certainly an area I think we're going to be spending some time on.
Great, thanks for that. And a next question there from Tim. Thanks for driving this initiative forward. Can you tell me, I made reference to the steering committee, who's on the steering committee? And you might want to reference, Jen, the broader advisory committee as well, because it's obviously more than the steering committee that's been engaged. Jen, could you speak to that?
Yeah, certainly. And thanks for the question, Tim. The steering committee is made up of the main partners of Kathleen Sullivan and Scott Ross, as well as CAHRC and a representative from Gailey, Rosemary McClellan, as part of the Food and Beverage Canada board representation. And we also do, as Warren mentioned, have an advisory committee that is also in place. That advisory committee is made up of 16 members, representative of various stakeholders, industry, academic stakeholders from across both sectors. There is equal representation on that advisory committee between the 16. So there's 8 representatives from primary agriculture and 8 representatives from food manufacturing as well.
And we could make that list available for sure here post session, the names, rather than take the time to go through them today, but that is definitely available.
Yep.
All righty, seeing no more questions, I'm thinking we're ready to move things along here. So this will be really the bulk of our time together. And Kathleen and Scott, what they're going to do is go through the content of this strategic plan that's been developed by the steering committee and advisory committee with input from others. This will take a few minutes to go through. There's a few slides here that will be made available post-session. We'll pause at the end of this. Again, let's let them walk through the strategy elements. We'll pause and then open it up to questions and discussion once again. So Scott, Kathleen, I kind of forget who's going first here, but over to you two.
Thanks, Warren. And I'll kick it off and pass it back to Kathleen shortly. I think through this session, we'll be kind of passing it back and forth to one another throughout as we cover various elements of this, because we are really through this process working hand in hand on the whole strategy. So what you see in front of you right now is our best effort at synthesizing what is such a complicated set of issues down into one visual representation of what this strategy is going to address. And what you'll see in the different pie pieces are the themes that we've identified and agreed upon with our advisory committee as representing the core focal points of the strategy. And couple of that, there's that blue circle around the outside, and that really speaks to foundational themes that really underpin every aspect of this work and span the different themes you see. So we'll get into those in a bit more detail, but at a high level, the 5 areas, and they're in no particular order, are automation and technology, immigration and foreign workers, skills development, perception and awareness, and people and workplace culture. And I think We'll unpack a little bit over the next little bit what each of those means and some of the outcomes associated with it. But really did find as we engaged on this that really covered the bulk, if not all, of the aspects we were talking about. And maybe I'll pass it to Kathleen here to just talk a little bit about what that actually looks like in practice as a strategic plan for the sector.
I'll just start by saying on this slide for a second, as Scott said, labor is so complex and it impacts every business, every producer, maybe a little bit differently depending on what segment you're in, what area of the country, what product you're producing. And what's really important through this visual isn't necessarily that we've got the wording or the titles correct, but that you really, from the perspective and where you sit, can see yourself, your problems, your challenges in this model. The other thing I want to point out is that we also recognize in the ring around this pie, so essentially we're saying we think if we put measures in place in these 5 key areas, that will help us and provide the foundation we need for a good, solid workforce. We also recognize in the ring around that there are some of these overarching themes, and Scott's going to talk to them later, infrastructure, competitiveness, data, et cetera, that aren't necessarily specific to our sector, but are also quite important and foundational in making sure we can move forward. So what we did was we took these themes that you see represented here, and if we can go to the next slide, we literally are trying to build a strategic plan. So we call this the National Workforce Strategy for Agriculture and Food and Beverage Manufacturing. And what we have done, each of those pie pieces that Scott referenced and that you saw earlier, we have developed what you might see in your own organizations as a strategic framework where each of those themes is now one of the pillars or themes that we are going to be working on as an industry. And so we've got perceptions and industry awareness, people and workplace culture, immigration and foreign workers, skills development, automation and technology. What Jen will talk to you later about is how will we try to organize the work that we are collectively doing and bring it together under each of those themes. But for now, what we have done through the steering and the advisory committee is identified for each theme essentially an objective. When it comes to perception and industry awareness, what is it we think we need to achieve as an industry to make sure that there is a solid understanding of this sector and what career opportunities are? Same thing, what do we need under the theme of immigration and foreign workers to ensure that we've got the programs that are necessary to support foreign workers coming into the country while ensuring adequate protections? For each of these themes, as I said, we have an objective. We also have a set of initiatives we think we need to take a look at to achieve that objective. And then I think what's really important and that you find in any strategic framework is key performance indicators. So for each of those 5 themes, we also have identified how do we know if we're going to be successful? So I'll just sort of randomly take the last one, automation and technology. We know we are saying we will be successful in having the right environment for automation and technology if we can actually measure increased capital investments in our sectors, if we can measure increases in labor productivity, if we can measure employer perception of alignment of skills and needs around automation and technology. And so we are identifying as an industry, when we move forward on these themes, we have to be able to measure those results as well to know that we're successful. And what Scott and I are going to do now that you sort of have this visual of what the strategic framework looks like, we're going to walk you through in detail each of these pillars and what the objective is for each, what the key initiatives for each. And we'll start off with Scott talking more broadly about the ultimate vision for this project overall.
Thanks, Kathleen. Yeah, and when it comes to the vision, I think this was an exercise in sort of an iterative process that back and forth as we worked through those themes that are underpinning this, their respective objectives. We kept in mind throughout that, how does this reflect upon the global vision of this strategy? What is the sort of unifying objective that it brings this all together? And, we would get to a place where we had a vision statement, going through that process, reassess in light of what we saw coming through the engagement with the advisory committee on the various themes and the critical elements. And where we landed with that was the following vision statement. And I think, we would certainly welcome, this is a great opportunity to hear from stakeholders on that vision, whether it's, hitting the mark appropriately, but it's that Canada's agriculture and food and beverage manufacturing sectors are experiencing severe chronic labor and skill shortages while growing one of Canada's largest employment and economic sectors. And it's that a national actionable roadmap will create the desired workforce of the future that addresses both the immediate labor gaps and systemic issues. And that short and long-term nature we felt was very critical to this work, and just would speak to that in light of one of the earlier comments about, previous workforce action plans and things that have been developed here. Was there's a real sense of we need to be action oriented because there are immediate acute issues in front of us that need to start moving on right now. But at the same time, keeping in mind the bigger picture, some of the systemic issues that continue to challenge us now and will in the future. And so this was the summation of that work and the vision we see as underpinning the entire strategy. If you could go to the next slide. And again, building on that vision, and we will talk about the key indicators that Kathleen spoke to a little bit with respect to each of the different themes that's in that two-pager that was on those last slides there. But at a high level, we had a long conversation around what does success really mean in the context of a strategy like this, because there are just so many moving parts, different metrics you can look at, different elements. And I think boiling it down to as simple terms as we could, it's that by 2030, the agriculture and food and beverage manufacturing sectors will have a vacancy rate that's lower than the Canadian average. And I can say, as someone from primary agriculture, where we've seen 9% vacancy rates, for example, for quite some time, that's a very meaningful objective and certainly captures a whole lot. And that's what we'll be discussing in the next little bit here. But I do think that we found that as a most compelling sort of straightforward metric for success here. If you go to the next slide on the foundational themes, this is those items that were identified as cross-cutting issues across all the different focal points of our strategy. And I think it won't be a surprise to everyone on this call that competitiveness and profitability for the sector is a clear fundamental foundation for all of this work. Is, the intent behind this is making sure that our sectors are globally and domestically competitive, profitable, and able to thrive and take advantage of what we see as immense growth opportunities for food and beverage manufacturing and agriculture in Canada. I think there's a number of things going on in the world today, and that we see moving forward in terms of growing global demand for food that really does position our sector to be an economic driver for years to come here. But labor continues to be one of those thorns in the side of our growth prospects. And so that lens of competitiveness and profitability really does fundamentally underpin all of this work. And the next one really speaks to, again, being evidence-based and making sure that we are working from data. And I think there is a sort of two elements to this. One, in that there are some short-term immediate issues that need to be resolved. And in those, I think, rather than spend time undertaking research on things that are self-evident, we have identified areas where we need to start work now. And that is not going to be held up by this. But at the same time, that doesn't negate the need for us to better understand the issue while we do that and move forward with more information and data as we go ahead. And part of that will be work conducted directly under the construct of this strategy. But I think, as others have said before, some of this is just leveraging the existing work that's already going on across the country and bringing it together so we can learn from what others are doing. And when it comes to the systemic long-term picture, I think there's clearly we need to better understand and continue to build better labor market information, better appreciation for where the challenges lie. And within each of those different themes, quantifying and understanding qualitatively as well what exactly is underpinning the challenges we're experiencing there. The next one on equity, diversity, and inclusion is something that came up time and again as we worked through each of the different themes. And it just became very clear that, it's at a certain point we had identified this as a theme in and of itself, but it just became so evident as we worked on it that this really cut across all different facets of the strategy. I think in particular, we continue to talk about underrepresented groups in primary agriculture, and I'm sure they're doing the same in the food and beverage manufacturing industry. But also, I think when we look at our economy writ large, there are underrepresented groups across Canada that are just not adequately represented in our labor force for any sector. And really there is an opportunity there for agriculture and agri-food as an industry to really look at those individuals and how we can bring them forward to opportunities that exist in our sector while simultaneously addressing some of our longstanding challenges here. And that sort of very focused approach on EDI is going to be critical both to the success of this project and to the long-term diversity and strength of our sector. Indigenous engagement, again, has been identified here really as a standalone item, and I think it is just in reflection of the unique relationship we have with Indigenous peoples across Canada and the need to work very concertedly at engaging with those communities and those peoples to ensure that we understand their perspectives on all of these different themes, and that simultaneously we're working hand in hand with them to move this forward to our mutual benefit. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there and ongoing engagement through CAHRC already in terms of an Indigenous advisory group. And as someone who works in primary agriculture, I can only speak to the fact that there is a real need moving forward for us to continue down that path and really understand and build leadership across our sector in engaging more closely with Indigenous peoples. And I think this strategy is going to be a great opportunity for us to learn and build on that as we go. And finally, infrastructure. And I think we'll unpack this more with respect to each of the themes, but infrastructure means a lot of different things in different contexts here. And it's not just your traditional hard infrastructure, but the soft infrastructure that underpins many aspects of labor as well. And I think I'll do a disservice trying to synthesize that right here, right now. But with that, I think we should get into the themes themselves. So I'll pass it back to you, Kathleen, to get us started on that.
Sure. So what we're going to do now is Scott and I are going to spend a little bit of time unpacking those 5 different themes. And as a reminder for you, the 5 themes include perception and awareness, workplace culture, the role of foreign workers, skills development, and automation and technology. And the idea here is really that if we get it right across all of those 5 themes, if we put in the right measures and supports for producers and for companies, that ultimately you now have the best chance possible to be able to attract and retain the workers you need with the right skills. And so for perception and awareness, which is the first of those pillars, what we're going to do for each of these is just go through what is the overall goal. So we've actually identified what we think is a valid goal or objective. Where is it we want to be on each of these themes and for success? And what are the key steps we have to go through? Recognizing that this is still very high level, and there's a lot of work and a lot of engagement that's going to be necessary to really put the meat on the bones here. So the first of those 5 pillars we looked at in the previous slide is perception and awareness. And the goal that we have identified is that the number of people entering our sectors, both primary agriculture and food and beverage manufacturing, increases over time. And it increases by our enhancing positive perceptions of employment in our industries and by our raising awareness of the variety of careers that are available. And we then said there's certain steps we're going to have to go to actually achieve that goal. The first is that we need to spend time increasing positive perceptions and addressing negative perceptions of job seekers and students around our sectors, and that we need to target the most impactful perceptions for underrepresented groups in the economies. And this again goes back to one of those overarching themes Scott talked about, and that is the groups that where we have the most potential to expand our workforce through, for example, students, groups of individuals who perhaps aren't work ready at this point in time. How can we maybe attract them by getting to them early, explaining what the sector is about, explaining what job opportunities are about, and really helping them understand that this is an incredibly important and valuable industry to be part of, and that jobs and careers in our sector can in fact be incredibly rewarding. We've also identified in the second bullet here that we need to improve the efficacy, scale, and scope of agriculture and food processing career promotions. We haven't done enough or effectively enough in explaining and targeting to potential workers what the opportunities are in this sector. And that again really has to include targeting underrepresented groups. And so really what we're trying to do in this pillar is really recognize that there's a lot of people who don't know about our industries or don't have great perceptions about the jobs in our industries. And how do we get to them early to really recognize that there are opportunities and this is a viable career pathway for them? So that's really the first pillar that we have. The second pillar is around people and workplace culture. So of course, in the first pillar, we're saying, how do we attract people to our industry? This one is very much about that, but also how do we retain people in our industry? And so our goal here is that our sectors be viewed as a desired choice for work in Canada by job seekers and workers, that there's a really positive perception. People want to work in our sectors because of the culture, because it really is a good place to work. And so how do we achieve that? And we've identified 3 actual steps that we need to go through. The first is to develop and promote workplace culture models for businesses by including the impact of pandemic and post-pandemic on workers. So we have recognized that we have to build tools in food and beverage manufacturing, for example. Over 90% of the food manufacturing businesses in Canada are really small businesses, like less than 50 employees. A lot of these businesses don't even have HR departments. We have to create tools for them to really help them understand how they create that HR environment and that culture that really makes their business a place that people want to be. We also have to identify how the sector will attract and retain employees in future years. We've got to take a look at clearly right now in my industry where we have 20-25% vacancy rates, notwithstanding everything we are doing to attract and retain workers, it's clearly not enough. We've got to do more. We've got to find different ways of creating tools and models for attracting people to our businesses and to retain them. And then finally, we have to increase the recruitment and retention of members of underrepresented groups by identifying and addressing barriers to their employment. Scott, I'm going to turn it over to you for the next couple.
Sounds good. Thanks, Kathleen. And the next one here is on immigration and foreign workers, something that came up in our last Q&A session. I do think for many of you, this is something you're intimately aware of already because there is just a lot of attention these days on the temporary foreign worker program, both from a primary agriculture standpoint and for the food and beverage manufacturing industries. And essentially our overall objective here is just ensuring that there are programs to facilitate the entry of foreign workers and new Canadians into our respective sectors. It's as simple as that. And I think that sounds very easy and straightforward in theory, but in practice, I think a lot goes into that, as I'm sure Kathleen can attest to recently. And here, when we talk about what is required to actually get there, it is first and foremost ensuring continuation of the temporary foreign worker program, including the seasonal ag worker program, and establishing programs that help facilitate the entry of foreign workers into Canada to fill year-round jobs as well. And I think that distinction is really important in the context of primary agriculture, for sure, is this notion of there are distinct job needs in our sector, and some of them are certainly seasonal in nature, but there are also a considerable number of year-round jobs, and those employers within those respective areas have very different needs in many respects. And it's important that we ensure there's programming to respond to the diversity of needs that exist across our industries on that front. We continue to hear and see strong support for the seasonal ag worker program as an effective international model for migrant worker programming, and it's certainly something we want to see maintained through this. But at the same time, looking at what other programming streams and program elements are needed to work for the entirety of our industry. Ensuring immigration streams to provide clear pathways to permanent residency is another one. And I think, as you'll see here, these are very high level at this point in time. The purpose of this strategy is to engage on these elements, but we've already become clear across the board, I think, on the importance immigration plays for the future of our industries in terms of finding individuals that are actually available and interested in doing the work in our sectors. There are a number of people coming into Canada with agricultural backgrounds, for example, and we need to find ways to do a better job of bringing them to our industries, working with immigrant settlement agencies and other stakeholders in this space to really look at how we can improve that dynamic and ensure that there are also the sort of program criteria in our immigration policies to help bring people to our sector and ensure they can get into the country on a long-term basis and achieve permanent residency. And finally, I think there's a need to, we've identified a need to increase employers' knowledge of foreign worker programs. And I think that speaks to the complexity of those programs, particularly for those that haven't been using them for years. I mean, there is a real diversity of familiarity with these programs. And even for those that have been in these programs for a number of years, they are still quite complicated to engage with and bring a whole host of challenges on that front. And I think everyone benefits from better understanding, improved simplicity and streamlining of those programs to ensure that we can all fully understand and capitalize on the advantages that do exist in those programs and the opportunities that are there. I'll go to the next one, please, on skills development. And again, as an overall objective here, it is the development and implementation of a national skills strategy. So essentially a strategy within the strategy here that ensures the sector's workforce is appropriately skilled. And there are multiple facets to that when we look at what's required to get there. I think this is an area where there's a lot of need for information research to be conducted because first and foremost, it involves understanding and really reporting publicly and being quite transparent on an ongoing basis around the current and future skills needs of our industries. And what this requires from the perspective of the work we've done so far is about boiling this down and really being targeted in how we not only approach these issues, but how we speak about them and how we report on them from a research standpoint. Because I think this really naturally builds on the next element of this theme, which is ensuring that governments, post-secondary institutions, and private trainers develop and deliver programs that respond to the sector's evolving skills needs, including lifelong learning. And really that's only possible if we have a good understanding and a good common understanding, which I think is why it's so critical, the reporting element here of where those needs lie, where they lie now, and what is coming in the future, so that we can work together as an industry with these partners across the educational institutions to identify what's needed before we need it and where possible, and ensure that there is curriculum available to really help us develop the skills needed in those areas. And the last element of this is really just building awareness of career and training opportunities that exist in our sector. I think both agriculture and food and beverage manufacturing provide some really unique opportunities to individuals across Canada that we as sectors can do more and more. I think this is an area of never-ending need, frankly, in understanding and telling the story of where career opportunities exist across our industry in terms of career pathways, how you enter the industry, how you can move through it, and the opportunities that exist to move up in our respective sectors. And make this the sort of innovation activities that are going on in our sectors more understood and publicly clear to the public in Canada in general. And again, I think as you'll see, it speaks to that need for targeting and ensuring we're responding to identified needs. Kathleen, I'll pass it over to you to wrap things up on the themes here.
Sure. So the last theme is around automation and technology. And certainly from a food and beverage manufacturing standpoint, we as an industry fall behind other manufacturing sectors in Canada, but also other food manufacturing sectors in different countries when it comes to adoption of automation and technology. And we have recognized through this project that automation and technology has a multifaceted relationship with labor. First of all, it can be a tool that helps us to lessen our reliance on workers, which is of course important when you're in an environment where you're short of people, but also it has a real impact on skills, right? So once we implement more automation, more technology, we've actually often changed the skill profile, and that profile starts to change more rapidly over time. What we have identified as our overarching goal when it comes to automation and technology is that the adoption of automation and technology is used to apply the skills of an agile workforce and increase productivity and competitiveness. So we really have recognized that multifaceted, that on the one hand, automation technology requires this skilled agile labor force. And on the other hand, it can also help us with productivity and competitiveness and reducing our reliance on volume of labor. Well, we've identified in terms of how to get there on automation. And I will say that compared to some of the other pillars, we actually we found that our ideas around automation and labor were perhaps a little less developed. And that is, again, a real reflection of the fact that compared to, let's say, foreign workers, where we have collectively been doing a lot of work in that field, we really are behind when it comes to thinking about the role of automation and technology and how we facilitate its adoption in the sector. So we've identified two sort of important steps in how we achieve our automation goals. One is to increase adoption of automation and technology across the agriculture and food and beverage manufacturing sectors. And that one seems kind of obvious. Like if you want more automation, then we have to increase the adoption. And I'm just going to use this as a bit of an example that, like any strategic plan or framework, this is very high level. And ultimately what we're going to have to do, and Jen will talk about in the next panel, is figure out, okay, how do we crack that nut? How do we actually tackle that? Who already in our ecosystem is working on automation and technology? Who's doing what? And how do we bring that community together? And how do we start to move forward in the right direction to actually see the increase in adoption of automation and technology that we really need? And the second piece, of course, is recognizing that we need to ensure our workforce has the necessary skills for evolving automation and technology. So if we are going to increase the amount of automation technology we have, we've got to make sure our labor force from a skills development standpoint is ready for that. But also technology evolves quite quickly, and we've got to make sure that we've got a mechanism to identify the matching skills that are required and that also will evolve, and that we've got the mechanisms to link to the training institutes to ensure that the programs stay up to date. So these are sort of in summary, the 5 pillars that we've got, where we have said, if we do work, the kind of work we've just identified under each of these 5 themes, we have set ourselves up as industry to be able to attract and retain workers with the necessary skills we need to support a competitive industry going forward. And what we've presented to you today in terms of this framework is really the high level work that we have done so far through the steering committee and advisory committee. And this really is as far as we have taken this. And what's really important is that we, first of all, share this with all of you so that you can sort of think it through. And also we can hear from you as to whether you think we've got it right or we've missed things or we need to do some tweaking. And then as next steps, as Jen will talk about the next panel, we'll talk about what we think we need to do with this, because there's a lot of work that flows out of this, which includes new work, but also recognizing the work that many of you are already doing and pulling it together. So Warren is here, and I think what he's going to do next is facilitate discussion. So he'll, I think, encourage you to send your questions and answers forward, and we really look forward to this segment of engagement.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kathleen and Scott. Appreciate that presentation. And as you just pointed out, Kathleen, the contributions that the advisory committee has made to this exercise. And I have good news, Kathleen and Scott. We've got some questions already. And we've got some questions and comments in here as well. So some discussion going on. I'm going to try and suss out the questions. And I see I've got a raised hand up as well. I'll encourage people to put your hands up, and you can get in the queue orally here. So the first question is from Vicky. Is accessibility assumed by inclusion? The issue we often have is accessing programs in the timelines that work for our business. Accessibility is a key point in a highly rural industrial base. Comments on that one, Kathleen, maybe?
You know, I think one of the things that we have found, I'll sort of tackle this a couple of ways, certainly in terms of inclusion. I really believe, and I think that most people really understand, we have to find ways to expand the number of people who are here in Canada who can come into the workforce and contribute through work. And a lot of those groups face barriers that they find challenging on an individual basis to overcome, and that it's very difficult for individual businesses to try to overcome. And that can include things like trying to access programs that don't fit with a company's timelines. We hear that a lot across the board on automation and innovation as well. We are going to have to work together and try to find really creative ways to understand how do we kind of systematize this and help empower companies and also help empower communities to be able to match each other and come together so that we have job opportunities, and people who are looking for jobs and may not be work ready now can be paired up. And I think that has been a huge challenge that we have certainly faced as an industry, because most individual companies aren't equipped to take that on. And we're going to have to understand how we try to create the tools that enable this to happen.
Great, thanks, Kathleen. And I'm noticing a couple of comments in there. That just a reminder, the slides will be shared. We realize there's a lot of information here. Conversations will continue, and there will be a recording of this that's available as well, as Phyllis pointed out there. Just another question from Vicky. I regularly get inquiries from international citizens looking to come and work in Canada. Will there be a mechanism that works to connect those interested to come to Canada with possible positions of employment in Canada, or how do we connect? Scott, do you want to weigh in on that one?
Yeah, sure. It's certainly a topic that has come up, and I don't want to presuppose the details of exactly the solutions we're getting to, but I would say the issue you're speaking to is something we've talked a lot about. And I think it's a multifaceted one, in that a lot of part of the reason I reference the need to engage with immigration settlement agencies is a lot of our immigration infrastructure is really dedicated to urban environments as it stands in terms of the supports that are available. But we recognize there's an immense amount of need out there and opportunity if we can do a better job of making rural Canada or our respective sort of industry sectors more appealing to new Canadians. And that requires new approaches, more diverse stakeholders being brought into the fold to talk about how we build an infrastructure that is conducive to that happening. There are some great examples I know across Canada already of communities of new Canadians developing in communities in rural areas across the country. And I think one of the examples we need to draw upon elements is, where are there best practices that we can learn from, and where has work already taken place that we can all build upon and systematize? And beyond that, what are the relationships we need to build to make that happen? Certainly there's a policy side to it as well, but I think there's also a lot that comes from just the dialogue and the engagement we're going to take on as we go through this process.
Great, thanks, Scott. Kathleen, did you want to add there? Go ahead.
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Just getting ready for the next question.
Okay, so I just, and again, there's some good points being made here. We'll capture this. I'm trying to suss out the questions, and my screen just moved. Sorry. There we go. Do you see having a standardized prior learning assessment and recognition process across the country, or P&T level? Do you see value in that, in standard prior learning assessment and recognition processes? Kathleen, Scott, has that come up in the deliberations?
Well, I think that's a really great example of why we need to start putting together working groups of experts, because that's sort of way outside the work that I do. I think that, what we've really recognized is we put together a strategic framework. And we're now going to have to bring together the people around each of those topics who speak that very language that you just described to me, because I'm not an expert in that particular field. I don't pretend to be. We've got to put together the people now, and I know that there'll be sort of an appeal later for those who are on the call asking where you might have interest. The really fascinating thing about labor, and you will have seen it through the different pillars, right? There's no one person who really is going to be able to sit down and provide the expertise we need across every single one of those 5 topics. I imagine a world where under each of those pillars that we labeled, you're going to have multiple projects that in turn bring together different pods of experts who have to come together. And it's really that sort of collection of expertise that's going to lead us forward. So to the person who asked that question, I would encourage you to hold that question tight. And what we would hope to do over the next a couple of months is really start to build the discussion groups and the fora to be able to have those really specific and technical discussions.
Great, thanks. I'm going to move over to that Q&A section just for a couple minutes here. So a question from Sear. Hey, by the way, Sear, good to see you again, at least virtually. Will we ever get together again? I don't know. Anyway, the question, what barriers to rapid immigration of Ukrainian ag and agri-food refugees currently coming to Canada? So what are the barriers to rapid immigration of Ukrainians, perhaps others? Have you talked about that? Scott, go ahead.
Well, I think it'll sound a bit like a broken record here. And I think what Kathleen just referenced is sort of my sense here is we have some understandings, you know, at an anecdotal level around what the barriers are right now, and are certainly aware of, I think, the more generally challenging dynamic we face when it comes to integrating new Canadians into our sector. And we've seen this in the past with Syrian refugees, for example, as well. An abundance of them came over with an agrarian background. And I think by and large, despite the opportunity that existed there, our sector wasn't necessarily well positioned to actually integrate those individuals in. And in many instances, they ended up in environments where agriculture and agri-food wasn't sort of a part of their lives. So I would say some of what I spoke to about the need for more integration with immigrant settlement agencies is critical, but also, again, just the notion of we need to engage people that are experts in this and make sure we understand the very detailed barriers that do exist there to ensure that we're capitalizing on that. And that falls into that more immediate bucket of activities. So again, I would just say, from my perspective, this is an example of something we need to move on very quickly and ensure we're having those discussions and getting some progress on. I don't know, Kathleen, if there's something you'd like to add there.
Yeah, I would, because we actually did some work with Minister Fraser's office at Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada, when they talked about very early on, and you know, countries were saying we need to get ready to receive displaced Ukrainians. We had actually gone so far in our industry, and there's a number of associations were on this call who also were working on it, to go to our member companies and ask them to identify jobs. And they went, it was phenomenal. They went to the through steps to identify plants they have across the country, the jobs they have, and whether those plants have within them already communities of Ukrainian workers or workers with Ukrainian backgrounds, and whether the surrounding communities have Ukrainian representation. The challenge we ultimately found, it really came down to that matching. So we could do that work, but they're really, from what my experience is right now, we really don't have good mechanisms in Canada to say, we've got people coming into the country. How do we encourage them? You can't force people to go somewhere, but how do we encourage them through information, through communication, and direct them to areas of the country where there is work that they could find valuable, in communities that would be very welcoming. Remember, when you have a displaced person coming to the country, it's not just about a job, it's also making sure that they've got a community where they can feel safe and comfortable and welcome. And that was for us the biggest challenge that we encountered. And I would say that's also the same. We're very much aware that there are Afghan refugees as well who are looking to come into the country. And how do we really create those mechanisms? That's something that we have to do with the federal government, IRCC, but also to the point Scott made with local agencies, resettlement agencies. So much of labor, this has always been a challenge that we have faced. Yes, we think that labor is with the federal government, it's with provincial governments, it's different orders of government, but it's also incredibly local. And so how do we figure out mechanisms or structures or formulas, I suppose, that can transfer from community to community, so you don't have businesses in 1,000 different communities across the country having to learn the same steps? How do we sort of systematize, as Scott said, that for them? But for me, that was the biggest issue. And actually, interestingly, yesterday, I had a call with the Guatemalan ambassador who is very interested in the reforms we've just seen to increase the number of foreign workers food processing can take in. This week's announcements. And that really came down to the same challenge that we had in the conversation, is that matching. How do they know they have workers, we know we have vacant jobs, but how do we actually match individuals in Guatemala to 8,000 different plants across the country? And that's really, I think, where we're going to have to start to bring in, as Scott said, a lot of experts who can really help us, but also help us think outside the box for how we solve some of these problems.
Okay, thanks, Kathleen and Scott. And there's other questions in here, ideas to include in the strategy for sure. There's one at the bottom of that list right now from Stefan that kind of speaks to intent and process here, I would say a little bit. Will the strategy allow for distinct perspectives and solutions for the different segments of the agri-food sector? A food processor in downtown Toronto will have a very different context than an asparagus farm outside of Tillsonburg, and will need different solutions. I know you guys have talked about this a little bit. Kathleen, Scott, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, sure. I think, I mean, in a nutshell, that is the intent of this strategy, is to move away from sort of simplistic one-size-fits-all solutions that I think often miss some of the diversity that's there, by engaging stakeholders through our two industries and understanding in a more targeted fashion what's actually needed for different individuals here, and doing so in a way that we can understand how that sort of sits within the broader industry. But certainly, I think if from my perspective, that's the fundamental intent here of the kind of work we're doing, is better understanding the individual needs, where we see commonality, working on solutions that work across the board. But certainly that diversity is sort of first and foremost driving the approach we're taking here, and why we're envisioning this being such a stakeholder engaged process, because we need to learn from all those different pockets of the sector.
All righty. Now, we've got a few more minutes here. There's a few questions. I'm going to go back up from James. Earlier, you spoke of care for foreign workers. Are you aware that for most provinces, SAWP workers pay federal and provincial taxes, but get no provincial insurance coverage? You know, do you see that being issues like that being addressed in a plan like this, Scott, Kathleen?
I would just say that I think, you know, again, we're at the strategic level right now, not talking about the specific solutions, but that's why, again, we want to have a conversation with individuals that work in these sectors that are involved in those programs. I mean, we do have an ongoing set of dialogues in primary agriculture there around the topic, and are always looking at sort of what can be addressed within the context of those programs, and how do we make them more streamlined for employers, but also ensuring that they're providing protections and support and care for the workers that are coming into the country. So I can't speak to the specifics of that right now, but all I can say is the sort of lens we're taking to those issues, that is squarely kind of the thing we'd like to hear from people on, and look at how that's affecting kind of the manner in which those programs work for our employers and for the workers that are so valuable to our industries, and increasingly so moving forward.
Okay, thanks. And Scott and Kathleen, like the overall intent here, we've got people on the line, obviously, that are interested in workforce development, are likely doing great things around workforce development now. The idea is to create a strategy, share with each other the issues and good things that are happening, and where there are gaps, do new things about them. Would that be a fair characterization, Kathleen?
Yeah, I think what we really, one of the values we're really committed to is not trying to ask people to stop doing the good work. This project is not about taking that over. We couldn't take it over. It would be ridiculous and foolish to do. And also recognizing, as one of the previous questioners said, that things vary by region, by sector, by segment, by size of business. And a lot of the organizations that are working on elements of labor are focused on various aspects of that. And we need to really tap into that knowledge. What we're really doing is saying, look, there's so many of us working on elements of labor. How much more could we accomplish if we were all trying to focus very much in the same direction? And if we were able to start to bring together pods of those experts to start to share the ideas. And clearly some of that is already taking place. I certainly don't want to suggest it's not. It's really trying to take what is probably happening organically now and really, amp it up and really try to get us all sort of focused in the same direction to see how much can we start to move the yardstick more than we are even doing now. So very much recognizing that folks are doing work. The other thing I will say though, and this has been another important theme through all of the work we've been doing, is the challenge function. So regardless of what we are all doing now, and I can tell you, I work a lot on labor. I know CFA works a lot on labor. It hasn't gotten us where we need to be. That's not a criticism of the work we're doing, of the contribution people are making, but clearly we do need to spend some time thinking about, are there other things, not just gaps, but even how we do the work we're doing now that could enhance the results that we're getting from what we're doing. And I really think that challenge function of challenging ourselves to think differently and see if there's new ideas or new ways of approaching problems and solutions is equally important to this project. And Scott challenges me all the time. So we're off to a good start.
Great. And Stephanie, I see your question in there, and there's a response as well. So yeah, good. All right, to manage our time, in the time zone I'm in, it's Friday afternoon. And I know these are serious issues that we're dealing with here, but after this meeting is over, I'm personally going to go to a more social atmosphere. And that needs to be at the top of the next hour to keep things on time. So we're going to move along here. That was an overview of the strategy. Jennifer, where do we go from here and how can people get involved?
Sure, thanks so much, and really great conversation so far as well, which is great. I just do want to echo some of the comments that were just made. As you can see this, and as we all know, as we live this is a very complex issue. It's a multi-pronged approach, and it's going to have to be taken to move us forward. The agriculture and food manufacturing sectors in Canada are extremely important to the Canadian economy. We want to ensure that we do continue to have that strong presence in the economy. And we also know that we will be facing competition from other industries across Canada and globally for workers as well. We're not alone in facing labor shortages. As an industry, certainly we may be ahead of the curve a little bit as far as facing those shortages, but it's something that is impacting pretty much every industry across Canada and many Western developed countries as well. So we're hoping that this work will really give a place for us all to come together on the same page. We're hoping that you see this as a platform to collaborate. As we've talked about, there's lots of great work happening. There's lots of similarities, even though sometimes we may not feel those similarities between commodity groups, locations, regions, primary production, food manufacturing. So we're hoping to be able to complement those similarities and work together, learn from each other, as well as, look at some of the things that are working. Maybe there's something great working in a rural community in Nova Scotia that can be amplified or shared and applied in a community in British Columbia. And again, we're hoping that this project will provide that platform to open up communication, to identify that great work that's happening and share a bit more broadly and learn from each other. But also, as Kathleen mentioned, for us to start to think a little bit outside of the box, think about different ways of doing things to ensure that we do move forward in addressing the issues and that we really have that strong, competitive, prosperous sector once we get to 2030 and beyond. So some of the work kind of from a functional project point of view is, as you can see, there's a huge amount of work to be done. We have tried to organize things in pillars and, you know, try to make it a little bit easier to tackle as far as some of these issues go. We will be forming some working groups going forward. Some of the research that will be done over the next year are really focused on that impact of automation and technology, a little bit around compensation, perceptions of the industry by those people not working in the industry currently, taking a little bit of a look around some of the barriers for equity, diversity, and inclusion. Some of that work has also started from a governance point of view. I know we have some of our committee members on the call today, and I really want to thank those that have joined our Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee, as well as our Indigenous Advisory Committee. Again, we did talk about those as being very important themes in the work that we're doing on all 5 pillars. And we will continue to develop and work with those committees as well, which is very important. We will continue to communicate. This is only the first step in sharing the information. There was a question earlier about, you know, how does this go with some of the work that's been done in the past? We were really wanting to spend some time to ensure that all of that work that's been done in the past can be reflected in this, so that you know that we're not starting from scratch, but instead we're moving forward. And so we look forward to a significant amount of communication going forward, as well as, you know, sharing, connecting with you in any way that works with your commodity groups. Happy to attend meetings, happy to attend events. There will be more events like this going forward as well. Certainly, I would think you know, event similar like today happening in early fall, but that doesn't mean that there won't be more communication along the way. And at the end of this, you'll be able to complete a survey, which will give you an option to see just how much you want to hear about the project and how much you want to get involved. So as you know, we're trying to support the idea that this is about all of us coming together, and the more information we have, the more people that are part of the process and sharing information and talking about ideas and solutions moving forward is only going to make this more successful. So you will see that at the end. And I know that Kathleen, Scott, and I as well are very open to connecting, talking, sharing information, answering questions, and doing whatever we can do to support the work that you're all doing on this as well.
Great, thanks for that, Jennifer. So to Anonymous and that question that's in the Q&A, the answer is yes, through those working groups. And you've got Shannon already signing up, Jen, for one of the working groups, so note that. And to Lynn, definitely, we will give you contact information for the steering committee here. Okay, any additional questions that you'd like to ask? And use that Q&A function, raise your hand. Somebody did have their hand up and it went back down, so I don't know who it was, but if you want to ask a question out loud, put up your hand. Question of any kind, anything we've talked about today, the path forward. There, I got 2 raised hands. So Stefan, introduce yourself and ask your question, please. Aaron will unmute you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. If I could, I'd like to make a comment that, and I don't want people to take it the wrong way, so I'll try to be as surgical as possible, but it has to do with the overarching themes. And I think I look at the next stage where, you know, we start promoting this this strategy to commodity groups, to farm groups, you know, more at the grassroots level, where you really get that detailed stuff that that everyone was talking about. And when the first slide, how do I say this? The first slide has 5 themes, and 2 themes are just so foreign and unrelatable to, just like I'm talking about the DEI and the Indigenous. They're not bad themes, but they're just they're unrelatable to our membership. And I'm not trying to be tactless. I'm just trying to really convey, if that's the first slide, I just feel like we're giving ourselves headwind. And I wonder if we can bundle that into something like societal values, you know, something that it bundles those two together. It makes it clear that we've got these societal values. But I think I'm expressing concern about having 2 out of 5 themes be just out of touch with our membership. And sorry for being such a downer.
No, thanks, Stefan. Scott, do you want to comment on that one?
Yeah, I guess I mean, I hear what you're saying. I think familiarity with the language is something we've worked on a lot as we've been talking about this. In particular, I think we're still, for example, on the Indigenous one, engaging with the advisory committee around exactly how to characterize that approach. But what I would say is when we talk about the substance of the strategy, these are certainly lenses that are applied to all of the work. But when I think of the first themes that we introduce with, and it's not to reduce the importance of those, but it is about those 5 you see in the middle of that diagram. That is the focus of the work. It's those other lenses that are being applied to it. And when I think of Indigenous engagement as a prime example, I think the lack of familiarity with that issue speaks to why it's so important to us as a strategy, is that there are missed opportunities there, and also a real need to better understand exactly, you know, what that means in the construct of our industry from a workforce engagement standpoint. And so I think by necessity, we're trying to explore some areas that aren't the kind of familiar ground our sector works on a day-to-day basis. From a communication standpoint, though, I think that's really important feedback that we need to think about as we start reaching out to individuals and trying to make sure that this does resonate with them.
Great, thanks, Scott. I got another hand up from Anne. Anne, could you introduce yourself and ask your question, please? Unmute Anne, Aaron.
Hi, I'm Anne Ramsey, and I'm in the Agri-Food Labor Management Branch within the COVID Recovery and Response Secretariat in the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs. And I was wondering, often we refer to a lot of jobs within agri-food, whether that's processing or producers, as unskilled. And I'm hoping that there will be more in-depth review, job-based task analysis to really get a much better handle on the skills and knowledge that in fact go into many of our frontline kind of occupations, which would then enable us, if we know what they need to be doing and what skills and knowledge that takes, then training programs can be a lot more targeted and responsive, including looking at the model of workplace training, whereby a trainer education institution works with the employer to create a customized curriculum to in fact offer it within the confines of the workplace, you know, with space providing and all that other good stuff. So just wondered about that job-based task analysis. To me, it is a major thing within any kind of labor study that needs to be included. But it does take a lot of work, but it's definitely worth it. Thank you.
I'm happy to sort of answer that, Anne. It's nice to see you. And I will say Carol Gardine from Maple Lodge Farms had asked something similar in the chat that I answered in writing. A couple of things there. I agree with you fully. Like, you know, we have to, these are valued, every job in the food plant is valued. We sort of think of these as foundational jobs is another way that we might refer to them. But I do think that we do have to take a step back and think about sort of as part of our own work culture, how do we view these jobs? How do we reference these jobs? And how do we explain these jobs to potential candidates? I think one of the other things we, you know, Carol was talking about this in the chat section, like a lot of times when we think about skills training, we focus on post-secondary institutions. Certainly in food and beverage manufacturing, we have a lot of, you know, research, science-based jobs. There's no doubt about that. But training for us is, and I think probably for agriculture as well, it's across the board, right? I mean, some of the training that's important for our jobs actually doesn't necessarily now, but could actually take place in secondary school. Also, training for us, importantly, can take place on the job. And when we think about some of the time it takes for certain training programs, particularly in the skilled trades, for example, it would be actually beneficial for us to try to identify new models where the training can take place more and more within the actual job environment. I really think on the skills development side, that is where we really have to start thinking about what are the needs of the employers, and how do we start to create a skill development environment that is creative, that maybe takes us outside of the boxes that we're kind of used to, and to really make sure that it is responsive both to what employers need, but also to what workers want, and then helps to ensure that workers actually are gathering skills that allow them to advance within their jobs and within their careers.
Thanks, Kathleen. I think it goes along with the whole thing of PLAR. We need to be recognizing workers so they can move ahead and have a full career.
Thanks very much for that, Anne. I've got one more hand up here. Dawn, again, introduce yourself and ask your question, please.
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Thank you for this time. Dawn Tababadam, I had to say something with regards to the last person who said with regards to the Indigenous comment. I'm from Wissahickon First Nation, Ontario. I have a business, First Nation growers, that I've been trying to work on and promote food security, and I promote indoor growing. And I just have to say, I've taken notes, and I was going to bring us back to the committee, as I do sit on the advisory committee with CAHRC. And you guys, I hear everything about all the stakeholders and who's all important to this whole thing. And yes, but one stakeholder no one mentioned, and that's Mother Earth. She's sick. We poisoned her with all our pesticides, all the stuff we put in our growing stuff. If you guys don't have the soil of Mother Earth to grow your vegetables, you don't have to worry about labor costs and labor people. That's why I promote indoor. We really, I think further ahead, because what are we going to do? No one's doing nothing for Mother Earth. In my culture, that's our mother. Number one, would you treat your mother that way and throw garbage on her and whatnot and pour whatever? Would you give that to your mother? I don't think so. So we really, as a nation, everyone worldwide has to start thinking of Mother Earth. Number one, I really promote, and no matter whether it's government, corporate, individual, we have to start protecting her, and she's got to be in our policies, number one, and all of our policies. But I just wanted to share that with you, and hopefully it gives you a little bit of understanding of where an Indigenous comes from and what I see. But thank you for allowing me that time.
Dawn, thank you very much for sharing that. I think it's an incredibly important perspective that we all need to be reminded of. And I think it also speaks very highly to why we have identified Indigenous perspectives and Indigenous values as part of this, because I think you're correct. It is foundational to this country, to the environment, and to all of our futures.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think soil health is a topic we all need to talk more about, and we're always pleased to sort of engage on that subject. But certainly welcome the comment, Don, and would be happy to discuss that further for sure.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Don, and thanks for that discussion. Now, I've got responsibility for time here. I know there's other questions here and comments. We will get those captured. Appreciate all that feedback, and as has been pointed out by Jen just now, the conversations will continue. These working groups will be established. More communication to come. And hey, Kathleen and Scott, we got a whole bunch of volunteers sticking up their hands in here, so that's all good. All right, it's quarter to the top of the hour. As per our schedule, I'm going to turn to you, Kathleen and Scott, to close things down here. And there was reference made in the chat, you may have seen there, from Phyllis. There will be that survey will be coming where you'll have an opportunity to ask for more information here and participate further. That's going to be coming immediately after this call. So Scott, Kathleen, over to you, please.
I guess I'm all up for mute, Scott, and I didn't discuss, I think, who's doing this part. I just really want to thank you all. I know that a lot of work has gone into developing this framework. First off, I really want to acknowledge and thank the members of the advisory committee, many of whom are on the call today. And I know that the names are going to be sent out. Certainly from my standpoint, we included both food and beverage manufacturing companies, but we also included provincial associations so that we did have that representation across the country. I also don't want to thank all of you. The fact that you are here today demonstrates that you are people who have a real interest in this topic at large or certain elements of it, and most likely have expertise and experience that we really need to be drawing on going forward. So we really hope that you take some time, take a look at the slides in some more detail, absorb what's there, provide us with your feedback, and ultimately over time, also provide us with your energy and your resources so that we can move forward with this work to the better of industry.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Kathleen. I would just like to add too, I've seen, some of the questions and comments are about what's ahead of us here. And I think, the engagement we've seen today is what makes this so exciting for us, in that, we are just at the start of this work. The hard work and the engagement and all of the sort of heavy lifting of this is still to come. This is really just an opportunity to hear from you all, and the level of interest we're seeing in the chat and in the questions is really encouraging, I think, because it just speaks to the fact that there are so many different people in this sector, in our respective sectors, with a keen interest in this and a desire to do more. And that is really what's going to be critical to the success of this initiative, is leveraging all of that interest and experience and expertise that we see across the stakeholder base, and making sure that we're learning from one another here. So I'm cognizant that, yes, as Warren said, we're getting on a Friday afternoon here, but I just really did want to extend my appreciation to the advisory committee as well, to CAHRC staff and the team there, and to Kathleen for her leadership on this as well. It's been a really exciting initiative to get off the ground, and just really pleased to see everybody kind of engaging on this in so much detail with so much energy. So yeah.
I want to, if I can sort of add one more comment. Sorry, Scott, you've inspired me. I do want to touch on CAHRC for a little bit. The work that I and people in my sector have been doing on labor for the last few months, one thing that I've really recognized is that there are industries across this country who are facing the same level of labor problems that we are. And those industries undoubtedly are going to have to go through the same exercise that we have already embarked on. That CAHRC had the foresight to work with the Future Skills Center to secure the funding for this, to really develop a workforce strategy for this industry for the future, is prescient. It's incredible. We are ahead now of many other industries across this country who themselves are realizing that labor markets have completely shifted with COVID. Their relationship as employers with the labor market has completely shifted. And I know that many of you in primary agriculture are very, very familiar with CAHRC's work, but for those of us who live in the food processing world, we aren't necessarily as much. And I just really want to let all of you, sort of from my world, really know the phenomenal work that CAHRC is doing, and that they really had such foresight to understand how critical a project like this was going to be to the future of our industry. And so they deserve just tremendous credit. And also, Scott and I are just the puppets. I mean, we show up. I know we do a lot of work on this, but the heavy lifting has really been done by the incredible team at CAHRC. And I hope everybody, I'm sure, will join me in recognizing their contributions.
Great. Thanks very much for that, Kathleen and Scott. And on that note, I'm going to suggest we adjourn today's meeting. I think we got to most of the questions, but not all. If you do have additional questions, comments, reach out to Scott, Jen, Kathleen, and that survey will follow this session. So thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend. Bye.